Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I am, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I should say the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. This is not the broadcast. This is not going to be a segment that's going to air over the radio. I usually try to keep these things relatively evergreen, meaning it's a story or a topic of discussion that you can talk about that's not time-stamped, that doesn't correspond to any specific moment in time. But I don't think it's any mystery that this is being recorded at the beginning of 2020. It is early January 2020. We just celebrated the new year. Arguably, depending on who you ask, we have entered into a new decade, the decade of the 20s. Some people say the decade doesn't start till 2021. Okay, because who counts from zero? People count from one. Whatever you think about that, that's fine. That's up to you. That's your opinion. But the fact remains is that it is 2020 this year. And the subject of this show is just something that I wanted to discuss with you. You are free to have your own opinions about this. In fact, that's one of the joys of doing this is that, especially with the topics that we'll get into, navigating new technology in the new world in 2020, that it is subject to various input, subject to various opinions. But I think it's at least fun to geek out about. And this is Geek Therapy Radio. This is what we do here. We geek out about a lot of things and bring up some interesting concepts. So to think about the past decade and where we've come in the past decade, there's almost too much to think about there. There's almost too much to consume there. There's so much happened technologically in the last decade. We almost forget about it. It's kind of like we're the frog boiling in the pot. So much has happened in the last 10 years. Really simple example here is smartphones. Where were we at with smartphones back in 2010? The iPhone had just come out within that, well, not within that year. It didn't come out 2010, but it had come out very recently. The smartphone as we know it today came out very recently to 10 years ago. Yes, we had Blackberries, and yes, technically we had phones that could access a limited version of the internet, or an even more limited version of the internet back in 2009, before 2010. And you could check your emails and such and write down notes and access a very limited bit of the internet, like I mentioned. So where are we at today with smartphones? We have more computing power in our pocket right now. We have, I think the most profound, there's two most profound effects of smartphones in general. One, and I will go back to use as an example to kind of clarify things. I'll use the iPhone as the example because the iPhone was the first phone that really ushered in a new age of smartphones. It blended the iPod and a telephone together. It put very useful, even more useful cameras in phones. Cameras in the phones have gotten more and more and more and more sharp, more and more clear, more and more megapixels, what have you. The phone in your pocket is a camera, is a computer, is everything. So particularly the phones and the cameras and the connectivity and the corresponding growth of smartphones in the world of Wi-Fi, as Wi-Fi has grown and been adopted more, the smartphones have connected us instantly and given us instant access to everybody. And with those phones, it created this culture of selfies and all that stuff. And it basically propelled social media forward in a way that we never would have even dreamed was possible or that was ever coming down the pipe. When I first signed up for Facebook, somewhere around the mid 2000s, I want to say, when did I get on Facebook? It might have been 2007. It might have been fairly, actually, that's a long time thinking about it now. Over 10 years on Facebook, easily over 10 years on Facebook. It used to be you had to be, because I guarantee you there are people that don't remember this, that are maybe even too young to remember this. You used to have to be associated with a college of some sort. And if you weren't enrolled in a school, then you weren't basically allowed on Facebook. So for instance, I would have to put that I went to University of Houston downtown or whatever. And now I could set up a profile on Facebook. It was a way to keep like college kids connect together. And there weren't statuses, I'm getting sidetracked a little bit here, but there weren't statuses as we know statuses today. It used to say, Johnny Hamburger is feeling, I'm sad about finals or whatever. Johnny Hamburger is feeling sad about finals. Like auto-completed for you. It kind of set you, it just was supposed to be how you're feeling, not multiple pages of political ranting, basically, is what Facebook has turned into now. But social media in general has taken off in the last decade because of, and almost exclusively, like wildfire, I should say, because of the smartphone, because of all the interconnectivity with the Wi-Fi and the cameras and the computing power and the access to everyone and everything and all of human existence and all of human knowledge in your phone right now. That is what led to the rise in the propagation of social media as we know it, which, depending on your opinion and how you view social media, for the good or for the worse of society, I personally don't think social media is inherently bad or inherently good. It's just something new that we have to learn how to navigate, especially now going into the next decade. Through the 2020s, I think things in our world are going to get so different, and it's not necessarily evil and it's not necessarily good. We're just going to have to learn how to navigate that. Speaking of social media, here are some things that I believe that we just need to be aware of and conscious of and try to navigate as best we can, using our intellect, using our common sense. This is all just stuff we have to navigate through the next decade, because believe me, I think the next decade is going to be a revolution on par with the Industrial Revolution. It's going to be on par with the invention of the radio and television and bringing electricity out to rural areas. It's going to be that monumental, that much of a shift in human society and human civilization is the next decade, is the 2020s, for a number of reasons. And I'm not trying to sound like tinfoil hat or anything like that. It's just technology progresses forward, and we have to be prepared of that, be prepared for that, at least kind of be prepared to navigate. Let me check something real quick. All right, we're good. So the first thing on the list here that I wanted to go over, I guess I should start with, it's actually halfway down the list, but we'll start with this, Moore's Law. I've touched on this in earlier shows of Geek Therapy Radio. Moore's Law, the physical part of Moore's Law that basically says the theoretical limit for a transistor, that is a binary transistor that can be a 0 or a 1 bit of data, is theoretically only as small as the smallest element in the universe, and that is hydrogen. So if you were to flip the polarity or be able to manipulate a hydrogen atom to represent a 1 or a 0, theoretically it can only be as small as that atom. Right now, as of recording right now, we're at the 7 nanometer process of CPUs, of computer processors. 7 nanometer, that is still way, 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 way bigger than an atom, than a hydrogen atom especially. 7 nanometers doesn't specifically mean that the transistor size is specifically 7 nanometers. Technically, there's like a parameter around there. It can be like between 7 nanometers and 10 nanometers. I don't know specifically what it is, but the point, that's beside the point here. The point here is that we have gotten so small in our transistor manufacturing processing or development of CPUs and processors, that we are reaching the end limits of the physical side of Moore's Law. The Moore's Law rule of thumb was that computers are going to get doubly as powerful every 18 months, about every 2 years. Now that's starting to slow down. It hasn't completely shut down together, but it's getting increasingly more difficult, virtually impossible to go smaller and smaller in transistor size. So we have seen the explosion of cores. It's the core wars now in processors. We thought processors were going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, at least in desktop CPUs side of things. Now, look at AMD Threadripper. Those things are almost as big as the meat of the palm of your hand. Processors, because it's hard to get those transistors all the smaller, manufacturing process much smaller, we have to make the chips physically bigger to store more cores of those transistors, because it's hard to shrink them down. So to make the computer more powerful, we have to make those CPUs all the bigger. That's what I'm saying, because we're reaching the limits of the physical aspects of Moore's Law. Now, that also isn't inherently a bad thing. As we get smaller in our manufacturing process of processors, that means that those processors use per transistor, per square nanometer, less electricity. So we have the same amount of energy storage, but since the circuits have gotten all the smaller, they need less energy to operate. So that, in a way, is a good thing. But we're reaching the limit now. Energy storage and energy density, lithium-ion technology, we have to graduate from lithium-ion technology. Mining lithium is becoming a problem now. It's becoming something that we as a species have to think ahead with. We have to think what's next down the pipe. So whether it's graphene-based batteries, maybe carbon-based batteries, what have you, we're going to have to figure that out. So the next thing kind of on the list here, that brings me to quantum computing. Since Moore's law, the physical side of Moore's law, is starting to plateau a bit, the next revolution that I think we're going to maybe not see to completion in the next 10 years, but we're going to make major strides in the next 10 years, is quantum computing. Quantum computing uses qubits. We're not going to get into all the technical details about what quantum computing is. I did an episode a few months ago with an actual computer scientist about quantum computers. And no matter where I'm putting this podcast out, I will put a link to that show below to find out more about what quantum computing really is. So quantum computing is going to really ramp up over the next 10 years. They're going to make major strides. Again, like I said, I don't think it's going to come to full fruition in the next 10 years. Maybe it will. There's still some significant hurdles to get over with quantum computing, but that is on the horizon in the next 10 years. In the next decade, we're going to make major advances in quantum computing. That's major. Quantum computing is a major is just a major hurdle to get over, but I think we as a society will get there, and that's going to amplify these next things on the list that we have to look out for. No matter what happens with quantum computing, these next things on the list are going to be critical for us as a species to navigate in the future. The quick interjection here. Remember, this is subject to opinion. At any point in time you're listening to what I'm saying and you have something to add to it or take away from it or a different perspective on it, of course, that is perfectly fine. We're all geeks about something. We all have our different opinions on things. That is glorious that we all have fascinating different opinions on things. So if you are watching this on YouTube, let me know your opinions on any of this stuff in the comments below. If you're listening to the podcast, feel free to email me, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com, and we'll talk about it there. Or go to Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook and talk to me there, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter, all that good stuff. I would love to hear what you think about anything I'm talking about in this episode. So back to quantum computing and what impact it would have on these next things, whether it's quantum computing having an effect on these things and propelling it exponentially forward, or computing stays as binary as we know it and still gets more and more powerful as it can, adding to these issues here. First of them is artificial intelligence, AI. The next 10 years are going to be bonkers when it comes to artificial intelligence. Again, I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. It's just something that we have to learn how to navigate. I'll use self-driving cars as an example there. Tesla has pushed the envelope, has pushed the ball forward a little bit with autonomous driving cars, but they are not perfect. Side note, personal issue I have is they called it autopilot, which is stupid on Tesla's part for calling it autopilot, and dumb on drivers' parts for trusting autopilot. Anyways, that's beside the point. The point is that artificial intelligence, one of the things that autonomous cars are going to have to do is basically make an artificially intelligent decision to either smash into a group of school children or take out one elderly person on a curb. Theoretically, that's kind of the paradox. That's kind of the example people use in terms of autonomous cars, is basically leaving it up to the machines to decide the lesser of two evils, free from morality, basically, is what it amounts to. The confinements of morality, the freedoms of morality, what free will. AI is going to operate outside of that. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to learn to harness in the most ethical way we can. It's just something to look out for. Artificial intelligence in the cloud, AWS, Amazon Web Services, and data mining. Our world is going to be digitized, and it's all going to be processed by artificial intelligence and ever increasingly powerful computers. Once we reach that threshold of quantum computing, that's going to be propelled exponentially further into the future. Essentially, what quantum computing is going to do in terms of AI and data mining and all of that, it's going to be able to do 10,000 years worth of traditional research in a matter of seconds, basically. That's going to be very good for things like pharmaceuticals. Instead of prescribing to a person 30 milligrams of whatever for their ailment, with quantum computing and AI and in the cloud and all that good stuff, they're going to be able to compute for your specific body. They have your DNA now, by the way. We've been given our saliva and spit to Ancestry.com and all that good stuff. They're going to know who we are. We've given that away. We've paid to give that away. They know our irises now. They know our fingerprints now. Everything they have not taken from us, we have paid to give them. Line up around the block for a smartphone with a fingerprint sensor in it, with an iris scanner, with 3D facial recognition. We pay $1,000 for that privilege. So they have everything they need to know about us. So what quantum computing will enable are these computations going through 10,000 years of computations in a matter of seconds to figure out you don't need 30 milligrams for this ailment. You need 2.3.56724 whatever grams or molecules of this, so we can target that ailment, minimize the side effect, and or eliminate the side effect altogether. And quantum computing and artificial intelligence, that's going to help us do something like that. On the flip side, quantum computing and artificial intelligence is going to make, for instance, code cracking or encryption all the easier to decrypt and encrypt. We're going to be chasing our tails again with data encryption and data safety and everything after quantum computing. Weather is another thing that quantum computing is going to help out a lot. Stock market analysis and different models and fractals and different chaotic structures. Quantum computing is going to help majorly in that area. Can be used for good, can be used for evil. Just something we need to be aware of in the next over the next 10 years. Telecommunication. Before I get to telecommunications, deepfake. If you don't know what deepfake is, it basically means that you're seeing my face and you're hearing my voice as Johnny Hamburger. It could be all artificial intelligence. I could not be real right now. I could be rendered by a computer, both my voice and my face and everything rendered by a computer. And remember, we've given them our faces, 3D models of our faces. We've given them everything, given our voices. For the past 30 years, we've been giving them our voices. I don't say them as a tinfoil hat. I'm just saying who we are is saved on a hard drive somewhere, basically. As far as how my face looks and how my voice sounds, that has been digitized and now can be reproduced through deepfake, especially over the next 10 years. It's just going to get all the more realistic looking and sounding and deceiving. You can have a political candidate give a speech that they didn't write, that they didn't record, and that they weren't there in a studio to have video footage taken of them. That means you can write anything and have anybody say anything at any different time, and it's going to be super hard over the next decade to decipher, is this real? Is this world leader actually doing this thing, or is he not? Is it deepfake? Deepfake, coupled with quantum computing, coupled with artificial intelligence and everything, is going to be something that we are really going to need to learn how to navigate as a society. Telecommunications and global Wi-Fi that's kind of a bad way to put it, but yes, putting satellites up in space to give even the most remote regions of the Sahara Desert high-speed internet access, a global network of always connected to the internet. Instant communications, instant access to information. Is it good? Is it bad? Who knows? It's just something that we're going to have to navigate. The new 5G network coming out. It's very confusing. I've talked about 5G a lot in the past. Data is going to reach further. Connectivity is going to reach further, and it's going to be all the faster. It's going to enable things like quantum computing and deepfake and data mining and artificial intelligence to be aware all the time. It sounds like some Terminator stuff as I'm saying it. But again, I personally I hold the view that it's neither good nor evil. It's just, I hate this phrase, but it is what it is. And we just need to know how to navigate it. And we're going to see it ramp up in the next decade. Mark my words, this stuff is going to just take off in the next 10 years. So the 2020s are going to be known as the decade that was the new, I'm going to say, not industrial revolution, the new technical revolution, the new communications revolution, the new AI revolution, whatever you want to call it. That starts now in 2020. Actually, I think it started back in 2016, technically. But the 2020s, it's really going to ramp up. What's next on the list that I think we have to look out for? Oh, this is good. I touched on it earlier. We have to figure out energy storage and energy density. We have to get off of lithium. So actually, yeah, since I already talked about energy density, I will wrap up my thought on energy density with this. Basically, it's that I think we as a society are going to start over the 2010s, we're going to think about lithium battery technology like we think of fossil fuels now. That it's something that kind of bridged the gap as far as our energy needs and energy storage and just a means of propelling our cars. We're going to think of lithium as old technology. We're going to think of lithium powered cars like we think of ICE powered cars, internal combustion engine powered fossil fuel cars. That's where I think we're going to start thinking about lithium based energy storage. But that's really it. I'm looking forward to it. If we want to, I think the range of electric cars and the battery life of our smartwatches is going to just really take off over the next 10 years. How much will it take off? That's yet to be seen, but it's something excited to be looking forward to and just geeking out about and keeping a finger on the pulse of energy storage, of energy density going into the next decade or over the next 10 years. But as I wrap up here, I want to know what you think that we should look out for in the next 10 years. Doesn't have to be doom and gloom, doesn't have to be ultra utopian or anything like that. It's just what kind of common sense things do you think are on the horizon that we're just now dipping our toes into the ocean of, that we're going to have to learn how to swim and navigate the waves and the tsunamis or the rolling wave. What do you think we're going to have to navigate over the next 10 years? Let me know in the comments below. Email me if you're just listening to the podcast, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. The best thing is Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook because that's instant. Also, Twitter is a really good way to get at me. What do you think we have to be aware of and look out for and navigate over the next 10 years? So that's going to do it for this episode of the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I want to remind you all that you are loved. I didn't mean for any of this to sound like any sort of doom and gloom or any sort of scary thing, because the reality is it's going to be as scary as we make it. It's going to be as scary as you allow it to scare you. How much are you going to feed into the fear? If it's not inherently evil, there's no reason to fear it. So that's another thing we have to navigate. Know that you are loved. Know that you're worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. Know that you are worthy of your own self-respect. Often that's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to love someone else. It's almost impossible sometimes to love ourselves. So let's try to work on that each day. And I think the world will be a better place if we're just more empathetic, more sympathetic, if we just think about our neighbor and just acknowledge at the very least that we haven't walked a mile in their shoes. So just kind of learn from them, stop talking, telling them what we think they need to do, and just listen more. Maybe if we just listen more, maybe the 2020s is going to be the decade of just listening to each other. How much can we learn by just listening to each other? It's amazing. Other than that, know that we're all geeks about something. Lean into your inner geek. Geeks are sexy. Geeks are awesome. It's cool to be a geek now. Let's make 2020s the decade of the geeks. 1920s had flappers. 2020s is all about the geeks, baby. And with that, more Geek Therapy Radio Podcast tomorrow. It's fresh 5 days a week. So until then, take care.